Well, good morning, everyone. I see that there are many of you who are filing into our webinar, and we're delighted to have all of you there in the audience. Welcome to this, I guess the fourth session now of the 9th Annual Academic Symposium. We've been having a terrific time so far and looking forward to more interesting conversation here in this upcoming hour, as we enjoy together the Freshman Honors Seminar Film Projects from Contemporary Questions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. John Nielsen, who is the faculty member supervising that course.
Thank you, Dr. McCoy. It's a privilege to be together today and to be with this fine group of students that I've enjoyed being with across this semester. This is the second year I've had the privilege of teaching IS I-99 Contemporary Questions, which is the entrance course into the Honors Society here at ENC. And for the last number of years, that course has been populated with the content equivalent to the Gen Ed course, the Bible in Current Perspective. And the Old and New Testaments, the Hebrew Scriptures, and the New Testament, as well exploring a variety of contemporary issues and questions that the Bible speaks into. And a core part of this course each year is a group project where students think and choose a particular topic that they want to reflect on and to allow the Bible to speak into that topic in various ways. And so this year we have 3 presentations, and we're going to have the privilege of watching their films and then having you ask some questions and letting them share some feedback and response as you ask them about their process and what they've learned and so forth. So encourage you to take advantage of the chat area even while the films are going on, get those questions and to have our panel of students answer them. I will just make you aware of the fact that these films are available on the Canvas page, but if you have just a little aware of the reality of go.
Hi, everyone. We're having some trouble with Dr. Nielsen's microphone. I think what he was about to say was that if we're having trouble with the live stream, if that doesn't come smoothly through on your feed, it is possible to go to the Academic Symposium homepage, and there you will be able to access all 3 of the films. You should be seeing the page where those films are being previewed for you. So if you'd like to watch them there, you can do that and then kind of tune in and out as we engage in conversation. But I believe Jessica Willis is going to come and introduce our first film.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Willis, and my partners include Baldo Carina, Micah Vaskowitz, and Lacey Price. For our project, we chose the controversial topic of capital punishment. And so without further ado, I hope you enjoy our documentary, How Far Does Mercy Go? With reflections on capital punishment.
For God said to Noah, I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. Whoever sheds blood, by humans shall their blood be shed, for in the image of God has God made mankind. Genesis 9:5-6. Since Jesus sacrificed himself on the cross, the covenant that was now replaced with a new covenant. Jesus' death on the cross ended any more need for death and bloodshed.
Romans 12, verse 19 says, Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord.
The Death Penalty Information Center has stated, capital punishment continued to wither across the United States in 2019, disappearing completely in some regions and significantly eroding in others. If this is something the U.S. should be doing, how come 20 states have abolished capital punishment and 32 states haven't had an execution in more than a decade? Studies claim 1 in every 25 inmates sentenced to death in the U.S. are innocent.
My name is Tara Brooke Watkins, and I run the Theater for Social Justice program.
I'm Lynn Bollinger, and I'm the chaplain of the college.
Robert Benjamin, Associate Vice President for Multicultural.
So my name is Julian Tegerstrand, and I am the Professor of Intercultural Studies in the Religion and Culture program.
I come at everything from empathy. When I have a position that is strong on something, it usually is because I've never experienced it personally, right? And then when I actually have to experience something, I'm like, this is not as clear-cut as I thought. And have I voted a certain way based on this like intense feeling that I have no true association with? The history of our country, we have often put people on death row who are innocent. Like we just make that this blanket decision. It's usually racial, and we don't look back. We don't blink twice. And then after we've murdered them, we find out that they're innocent. So I struggle with a law that doesn't allow us to have to dig deeper all the time. And I think that the capital punishment is about us feeling satisfied instead of about love is maybe not even the right word, instead of about seeking the best for someone else.
It's hard to either say you fall on one side or the other of it, because I think every situation is its own context. It needs to be dealt with as an individual case. When a crime has been proven without a shadow of a doubt, and it has been a vicious crime, and we know that we have the perpetrator who committed the crime, in those cases that I would be okay with it. On the other side of that, there are so many people who, our courts have said, we're sure that this is the person who has committed the crime, and that's not the truth.
I think one life being innocently being put to death is too much, and our systems are too flawed to have that as a consequence.
It's just a really complex issue because it's about race, it's about gender, and so just because someone is on death row doesn't mean that their story that they should be there, I guess. So it's not just a criminal issue, it's an ethical issue, it's a cultural issue.
"87% of Black exonerees who were sentenced to death were victims of official misconduct, compared to 67% of white death row exonerees. The color of a defendant and victim's skin plays a crucial and unacceptable role in deciding who receives the death penalty in America. People of color have accounted for a disproportionate 43% of total executions since 1976, and 55% of those currently awaiting execution. Over the past 120 years, 8,776 people have been executed. 276 of those executions have gone wrong in some way. Lethal injection has the highest rate of botched executions.
There was a Black man in Oklahoma who was sentenced to die, and they started injecting him, and it went wrong. And they had footage of him convulsing and screaming, and it just brings awareness to what we're doing by saying this is okay and I'm going to pay for it, my tax money is going to pay for this. And they like to pretend, I think, that capital punishment is humane, but when something goes wrong or you finally see it really happening, it is very difficult to know that you, as a taxpayer and voter, have supported that. The most humane way of capital punishment is beheading. Like historically, that has actually been shown to be, it's immediate, it's humane, it completely removes the brain from talking to the body, and it's quick. And we like to do it in a way that makes us feel better, but it's actually more inhumane to the person we're killing. So that I think is also really interesting, that if we're gonna do it, let's do it in a way that actually shows how inhumane we're gonna do it. And if we can't stand by that, maybe we shouldn't be doing it.
Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. For the measure you use, it will be given back to you.
Do you realize the kind of decision that we are putting ourselves in by saying somebody is unredeemable? We are putting ourselves in a position of being God's. And I don't have the authority, nor do I want it, nor do I deserve it.
As a Christian, I believe that everybody is redeemable. I mean, the most recent case that I have felt like I struggle with is the Boston Marathon bombing. So Dzhokhar Tsarnaev gets convicted of life in prison and then I believe the death sentence. And I just feel like he is savable. I just feel like he was in a position of being manipulated and controlled. And yes, I know that we should all have control over our own actions. But there's a reason that we say that you're not fully developed until 26 now. Like, if that's true, if we're literally saying healthcare is about you're 26 and that's when your brain starts kind of finishing its development, then we have to use that same science to argue that he can still grow and he can learn, and maybe he can become different and better.
James 2:13, because judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment.
Thou shalt not murder.
Jonah 3, verse 10. When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them, and he did not do it.
I would hope that we could be people who would see that we don't need to kill people as a good way of dealing with some of the real tragedies that happen in the world. But there's more to it than just do you agree with me or not. I just think there's so much that goes into the way we've been formed, the way our society has been forming our thoughts and beliefs. So yeah, no matter where it is that we fall, how did you get there, and what part of your story is connected to why you believe what you believe? And that's important.
I've learned through work at my own church, which I work in sexual victimization, and I have heard perpetrators say, like, I have seen now what I've done, and I wish I could be fixed, or I wish somebody would help me. And it's like, if we keep laws on the books that prevent help for people who finally see that they need help, I struggle with how that's Christian.
Somebody's life is valuable.
When can we say someone is unredeemable? Do we have the authority to make that choice? In the book of James, chapter 2:26, for as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. That alone works does not save us, nor alone does faith, but the combination of them both. We oppose the death penalty not just for what it does to those guilty of heinous crimes, but for what it does to all of us. It offers the tragic illusion that we can defend life by taking life.
All right, thank you, Baldo, Lacey, Micah, and Jessica. Appreciate your good work there. I'm going to open it up to any questions from anyone watching. Use the chat or the Q&A button that's there. And while we're seeing if there's some questions, I just would maybe start us off by asking if anybody on the team had their own views of this issue change through your work on this project. Anybody want to speak to that?
I can speak to that. Because before this project, well, I definitely would tend to lean conservatively in political views. So I would say I was definitely for the death penalty before this. But then after hearing a lot of like prominent people at the college that I go to talk about it, and then hear some of the verses in the Bible that also speak on the issue, I think it definitely changed my view. I wouldn't say all the way, but definitely made me think about it in a different way.
Good. Thank you, Micah. Anybody else have a thought on that?
I just want to say that in the work and all that went into this video and our group, that this is something that's not easy to make a stance or a position on. And even though we took one, it's something that, we still struggle with. It's something that, we ask ourselves, especially in doing this, like we did take a stance and we went somewhere to find information to kind of help us go there. But the more I sit on it, it's just so hard to really pick. But, I do lean more towards this side. It's just still very hard to say like one thing about such a huge topic and something that deals with such a huge amount of people and population, and there's just so many kinds of areas that deal with this. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. Like, it's not easy to pick, but this was something that we did go towards as a team, and so that's all.
And I think it speaks to the complexity of a lot of these issues, and that's good to be wrestling with that. That's a good point. Any other questions that maybe come from our audience? Post them in the chat or use the Q&A icon there.
I guess I can count myself as an audience member of a sort in this context.
Sure.
I would love to know, obviously the class, as Dr. Nielsen mentioned, is parallels the Bible in current perspective, and your work was informed a great deal by various passages from Scripture. But there are also, of course, quite a few instances in the Scriptures themselves where the death penalty, capital punishment, is used, is administered. And so I don't imagine that you all conducted an exhaustive catalog of all of those various passages. But I wonder if that reality informed your thinking, or how you think about what happens in those biblical passages where capital punishment is the remedy for some offense.
Yeah. Anyone from the team have a comment or response to Dr. McCoy?
I can go. I felt before like digging into some of the passages that they would all just sway one particular way, saying that the Bible is like strictly like for capital punishment or strictly against it. But to see like the different views and like the different context and culture that it was used in at that time, it's kind of hard because I always think like go back to God's word, go back to what God's trying to say to us. But at the different times back in that culture, certain things weren't and were appropriate. And so living into today's culture, I think that shifted some things and what's appropriate now. And it's definitely a really challenging topic because people who have personally experienced loss and hardship may have a different attitude towards that as a whole. And so I guess it just depends on how an individual reads and interprets the text.
Yeah.
You spend a good bit of time thinking about contextualization and what is the world behind the text that we need to understand to interpret it. Any other thoughts from anyone before we move on?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I just want to say that I agree that every case should be treated as an individual case. and that it is something that deserves a lot of professionalism because, as they mentioned on the interview, there are a lot of ethical issues involved. And I just wonder why, if many years after the individual is wrongly accused, like they find out that they're innocent, like why couldn't that happen 10 years earlier? Like it usually happens after the person spends either the whole childhood or adulthood inside the prison, or after they die, like they find out, oh, it was innocent.
Right.
That's it.
No, thank you. And again, it speaks to the need for additional supportive work for giving legal help and organizations that do that work that maybe no one else is doing. So thank you for raising that point as well. We'll appreciate the team tackling such an important and difficult issue. We're going to move to our next team, and I'm going to introduce to you Andres Medina, who is the spokesperson for that team, and he'll introduce their documentary film.
Thank you, Professor Nielsen. I hope my mic is kind of working-ish, sort of now. Well, like I just wanted to say thank you for everyone that's like tuning in and everything, including like my classmates and my group mates as well. What we created was a Prezi presentation on the ordination of women within the Christian faith, and my group mates are Evan Heisey and also Anna Romero. And basically, what we did was we created a statement and like a position where we used stories within the Bible, the history of ordination, and then current denominations of like what they feel and how they think within the topic, as well as new statistics that emerge as well. So yeah, we hope you enjoy it and hopefully raise you any questions that you might have. Hello, my name is Andres Medina. I am the spokesperson for my group with including Evan, Heisey, and Anna Romero. We are doing a project on the contemporary issue, the ordination of women in the church. So I will be sharing my screen with the rest of the presentation using this spreadsheet that me and my group created together. Now, in contemporary questions of IS 199, we discovered a contemporary issue and we decided to do the ordination of women in the church, and we wanted to ask, why is this important to us? Well, women are incredibly important in the development of society and sociological and economic and political factors even. It is no longer expected to just sit back and watch women do house cleaning and work while men work. It's not as dominant, and in general is not the respect level that has been earned and also just used to in our culture currently. An increasing amount of women every year are becoming the breadwinners of the families. And this past midterm election, more women have been elected to Congress than ever before in history. Times are changing. Women are becoming placed into higher positions of power as time moves on. It's inspiring, and the change should be continuous and continue to progress. So how does this relate to our topic? Well, the contemporary issue that our group has investigated is the ordination of women in the church, more specifically, women in the Christian faith. We decided to bring the history of ordination, stories of valuable women in the Bible, and modern-day denominational opinions to the surface to promote virtuous thinking within the church. And our goals are strictly to inform you and to just have your brain kind of move within the topic and get a better idea of it. So there have been various points in history where religious and ethnic groups have been persecuted. Just to name a few examples, the Holocaust in the late 1940s, another one would be British colonialization, and we just want to speak about women within their own Christian religion being persecuted. In the 13th century, there was an argument that women would never be ordained. This turned the lawyer Giudicio of Bologna to write, even if you appointed a woman, it wouldn't take because she doesn't have the right matter. This shows the blatant sexism that it was in the church in the early centuries, that to everybody else, it was normal and it was expected to have that same thinking. A bishop named William Rawlinson brought about the first known woman to hold leadership positions in the church, and when he set apart two nurses, yeah. This sparked the famous 1855 term deaconess, which is the female version of a deacon. Nearly 30 years later, the first deaconess are ordained in the Episcopal Church, Mary Johnson and Mary Caroline Figueroa. Around this certain time period, there was a new momentum for the NWSA and the AWSA, the National Women's Suffrage Association and the American Women's Suffrage Association, which could have given them that leverage to have that extra push, to have that authority and new power. The General Convention adopts the deaconess canon when this is the original statement they put out, is that they are to be unmarried and widowed, that is, presumed to be celibate at first. The convention removes that language in the canon in 1964, the new legislation, changing the wording to a woman of devout character and proved fitness. You can see how this denomination reversed the process of how religious sexism was playing out, even though they were small denominations at the time. From a sociological perspective, this is a large social and religious change. Whereas more women became known to be ordained, is increased opportunity in the church as well as made popularity grow in smaller church denominations. And some notable dates that we can include is the 1889 Ella Nissawanger was the first woman ordained in the United Brethren Church, which later merged with the other denominations to form the United Methodist Church. In 1892, Anna Hanscom is believed to be the first woman ordained by the parent bodies, which formed the Church of the Nazarene in 1908. In 1909, the Church of God in Cleveland, Tennessee began ordaining women. In 1930, a predecessor church of the Presbyterian Church ordained its first female as an elder. Now without pointing to a singular figure in particular, it should be noted that our ancestors left us an extensive task in which we are responsible for demystifying the reality of the role of woman in the religious world. It is a job that must be done with the utmost sensitivity and respect. However, discoverers are illuminating to have an era more equipped argument where we will point directly at two admirable women of the Bible who meet all the values and characteristics necessary to represent the exemplary of woman in the story of Jesus. Joanna on the right and Mary Magdalene on the left. So Mary Magdalene, even though the story of Mary Magdalene is presented as the repentant prostitute that dedicated her life to Jesus, there is much more that is hidden. She was the victim of one of the most atrocious defamations in history and witnessed to the worst murder known to mankind. To unmask the reality behind the figures of Mary Magdalene, many scholars have studied thousands of years of history to find the origin of truth. And back then, men were taught that they should talk as little as possible with women, and that women should not spend time with men who were not their relatives. And this was not a problem for Jesus because he did not follow such traditions. Those who followed Jesus had to prepare to encounter sacrifices. Joanna was not an exception. Her and her other women used their resources to meet the needs of Jesus and his apostles. Joanna's life can teach us a valuable lesson. She did her best to serve Jesus and was always happy to contribute to their preaching trips. The importance of being informed about these stories, in my opinion, and also the rest of the groups of my opinion, is that it shows how women have had an impact on the development of Christianity just as much as men have. Whether it was from receiving, teaching, or healings from Jesus, the women mentioned are important and should be recognized in the religion and taken into consideration, meaning that women can be just as a crucial role in the development of the faith. Today, the role of women in the church has been modified due to social change over the last few centuries. Women gaining power and recognition in Christianity has varied between denominations. According to the Pew Research Center in 2014, the American Baptist Church, Episcopal, Lutheran, Presbyterian, and Methodist churches have all generally allowed for the ordination of women. Denominations like the Latter-day Saints, Missouri Synod Lutheran, American Orthodox, and Southern Baptist do not consider women fit to lead congregations. Roman Catholics, although being the largest Christian denomination, also believe in ordaining women because they do not see ordination as a right in the church. The Catholic Church has had a history of excommunications of male priests for ordaining women to become priests, which are higher than pastors and deacons in this case, and this has led to a higher probability of them never changing this ruling. Now, these are some arguments to think about when considering how this has affected the church and how churches adjust in their sort of way that they would do the ordaining of women or not to do the ordaining of women. Those in favor of women being allowed to become priests argue that even though Jesus lived at a time when women had few rights, he allowed them to be treated with respect. Another common argument would be that Jesus appeared first to all women when he rose from the dead. Those Christians that were not in favor of women becoming priests argue that Jesus only called men to be the bosses. The Catholic Church considers itself bound by this choice made by the Lord himself. In the past 100 years, the Episcopal Church and the United Methodist Church have taken steps forward to create high-ranking opportunities for women, which has created increasing popularity towards smaller denominations. Truthfully, although the expectation that women should not maintain a status ranking in various churches is anti-progressive, if this topic was not religious, churches would be shut down, hated, and put into a cancel culture. But because religion is cultural and respected by documents like the First Amendment of the Constitution, there is most likely no sort of hope for social change in the large churches. Now, I wanted to bring about the importance of these graphs that I found that are also in the Pew Research Center that you can find. It is the belief in God among women, as well as the attendance at religious services among women. Now, we can see that 69% of women believe in God, and also are certain that there is a God as well as 40% of women attend a religious service at least once a week. And if you combine the two statistics right there, you can see that 70% of women at least attend at least one time, a few times a month. Now, if you look on the men's statistics, there is a significant decrease in how much men believe in God and also how much men attend a religious service. You can see that belief in God among men is only 57%, as well as, and there's 12% that do not believe in God. And their attendance in religious services among men, only 60%, around 60% are noticed to have attended religious services at least a few times a month. Now, in conclusion, based on history, the ordination of women is evident and possible to have justly. The stories prove the importance of women for the current Christian faith in the Bible. Current denominational views express deep change in their congregations with progressivism. The statistics express the importance of God's presence in the world of women as well. Now, these are the rest of my sources, and you can ask me questions on what I need or where you can find these statistics or these information that I had. I want to thank you so much for listening to this project that me and my group mates worked really hard on. We hope that you can keep this conversation alive and to stay progressive as well. I want to thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day and stay healthy as well.
All right. Thank you, Andres, Evan, and Anna. Looking for some questions from our audience. Please feel free to use the chat feature or the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and send us a question. I'll go ahead and start us off again and just ask someone, and maybe besides Andres or Evan or Anna, talk to us about your process on this issue and maybe something particularly that you learned as a result of the study that you did. Someone want to answer that? Could you hear my question?
Evan or Anna, did you hear Dr. Nielsen's question? You'll need to unmute your microphone. Anna Raquel, your microphone's still muted. You'll need to. Okay, Anna Raquel seems to be having some sort of issue that we're not going to get solved here immediately. So Dr. Nielsen, I think you better ask Evan your question directly.
Yeah, just Evan, didn't know if you had anything particular that you found interesting that you learned from the study and the work that you guys did on this project. Just what was a takeaway that you had or something that you learned in particular?
Yeah, so like what I thought was interesting was like women have always been treated as like secondary citizens throughout their whole entire life. Same with people of color, so they've had to break through barriers, especially in religion, just to get through.
Right, right. Yeah, and even in traditions like ours that have had a place for women in ministry still struggle against the reality of openness to that and places of ministry being made available. And so even where the commitment is there, there's the need for continued work to overcome some of those barriers, because we still see those barriers in reality, even where there are traditions and denominations and churches that would affirm women in ministry, and yet they're still struggling to find those places. And so it's an important issue. Any questions from anyone else on any of our contemporary questions panel or from our audience before we move to our next and final presentation?
What made you guys want to choose this topic?
Good question.
For me, it was definitely, I was very clueless on the topic. The whole idea of like church in general was very, very like shallow to me, especially like starting to come at ENC. But then after I attended Moore Chapel, I like got like more used to it, and I got really used to seeing kind of like woman leadership, especially like even outside of ENC. Like I went to another church outside of it, and there was like female pastors, and so I was getting really used to it. And so when we were deciding on which topic to do, I think it was really convenient that we were just starting out on learning about more topics within the Bible, and some of them start with like some of the beginning ones have to do with women, and so I think it was just really convenient, and it kind of like all lined up together.
Good. Thanks, Andrews. Any other last minute thoughts? Any questions from our audience? All right. Well, we'll move to our third and final documentary film presentation. And Leandra Marchand is the spokesperson. I'll turn it over to her at this time.
Hi, guys. So my group is me, Jenna Nielsen, and Rocco. And we did our project on the Bible versus science. So religion and science have had a really long history of being opposed to each other. And we wanted to explore why that is and if they have to be opposed. And so we took 3 separate angles to the issue, and we interviewed Dr. McCoy, who has the historical perspective, Professor Matt Thomas, who comes from a theological perspective, and Professor Mako, who comes from a scientific perspective. So we hope you enjoy.
Science and religion have a long and complex history with each other. These seemingly opposing views of the world have been at odds since their inception. But is the dichotomy of science and religion really set in stone? Science and religion have vastly different ways of viewing the universe. However, we propose that science and religion can exist as partners rather than antagonists.
There is a fairly long tradition now of mutual suspicion between these two spheres.
The church was at the forefront of innovation, embodying intellectualism, seeing scientific discovery as a way to get a greater glimpse into who God is and how God is created. So I think historically the church has been very positive in their views of science, intellectualism, those kind of things. It's only been within the last couple hundred years that we see the church kind of turning directions. I think science and theology have to coexist. Theology as an academic discipline is not isolated. It's influenced by the shifts going on around it in the world. And so I think it has to listen to the voices of reason and logic and science, and has to take those voices seriously.
There are actually different models. There is some disagreement about whether science and theology can coexist, like whether they're actually at war with each other. You got to choose one or the other. For myself, I think that science and religion are in dialogue. That's the model that I more subscribe to, that science can inform religion and religion can inform science.
I think in many ways they do inform one another. They need to inform one another. I think even in the creation narratives of Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, the science of their day was informing how they understood God created. They believed that we lived in the center of a dome, that the earth was the center of the universe, the sun, the moon, and the stars cycled around the dome. And this is clearly laid out in Genesis chapter 1. It talks about God created a firmament or a dome or a vault in the sky, which is basically the sky. Their science was informing their theology. And so our science ought to inform our theology too. But I suspect those stories in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 are less scientific stories and much more theological stories. They're not stories to tell us how God specifically created, but they're stories to tell us who God is.
The Bible isn't written as a physics textbook, that the Bible is, that Genesis 1 and 2 may be better or maybe more readily understood as poetic expressions of a larger truth about God's creative power rather than as, a daily journal of events that were occurring. I have to accept that the people who authored the texts in the Bible were geocentrists, right? And that they wrote the Bible in a way that reflects their geocentrism.
And so to read these stories as scientific stories is utterly ridiculous. They don't stack up to any type of scientific evidence that we have today, and we're reading the stories in the context that they weren't written. They were written to tell us who God is, not to tell us specifically how we got here.
There are definitely, there is a lot of evidence that suggests, and there's a lot of the raw fossil record especially, seems to really strongly suggest that there were dinosaurs and then they died and then there were human beings and that there were different human beings, and even DNA suggests that there's a lot of relationship between human beings and also chimps and other apes, primates.
Orthodox Christianity affirms that God created. It is not articulated specifically how God created. So I think there's wiggle room within Christianity for folks to subscribe to different theories or ways of understanding creation.
The majority of Americans believe in God. And the majority of Americans also accept that evolution is a, scientifically confirmed process. Many people, I think, find a way to reconcile these two realities.
I think actually the Big Bang matches with the fact that God created everything, because the Big Bang is basically our theory is all that comes with Big Bang is that there used to be nothing, and then, or at least there was some infinitesimal spot, and it inflated to be everything that we know, right? And so that's basically what the Bible says as well. Like God, from John 1, we know that from everything that has been made was made by Jesus Christ.
Science, as it is understood in kind of the popular imagination, is often understood to be making all explanatory universal claims that it would seek to explain virtually everything. And as science has gotten better and better at explaining more and more things, I think that has naturally created a kind of tension with people who understand the world in religious terms.
And there's a theory called God of the Gaps, and basically what it is some individuals of faith basically place God in any place of their knowledge that they don't understand. Basically, wherever they don't understand something, the gap in their knowledge, they place God there. The challenge with subscribing to God that way and viewing God simply as the answer to the things that are unexplainable, the biggest challenge with that is that there are, as science just makes discoveries and verifies things and proves things to be true, the individuals who place God there then either have to reject that scientific discovery or see their own conceptualization of God get smaller. And many individuals are uncomfortable doing that, so then they reject that scientific discovery, which then puts their theology at odds with that of intellectualism and science and those kind of things.
The promotion of this idea that science is out to, undermine or attack or destroy religious life may be best understood as a few loud voices that are trying to preserve a system of thought that is not particularly tenable. My interactions with my colleagues in the sciences, they don't see things in those kinds of all-encompassing terms, that they understand science as a kind of ongoing process of inquiry and investigation that understands things better and better, sure, but always has a certain kind of provisional quality, and so that there isn't a necessary tension between these two.
When I think of science, actually, I think of there's still so many questions that are unanswered, and we're trying to answer those questions, but there's still a lot of work to go in there, and so it should help human beings to be humble that we can't know everything. I think especially quantum physics, which is my specialty, one of the foundational truths of quantum physics is that we cannot know exactly what's going to happen to one electron at a later point. We can predict the probability that this will happen or that will happen, but we don't know for sure. It's the nature of God's creation. And again, there are different perspectives on this. I personally believe that science and the nature of creation helps a lot to put us in awe of God's creation. We should be in awe of God, because when you look up the stars, it's like, wow, it's just awesome. And that helps me to appreciate more of, even more awesomer, if I could say that, is God.
God is revealing God's self through the Bible, and God is revealing God's self through the natural world, and both are true. They just tell us different kinds of truths.
For myself personally, I interpret the Bible literally, and that's my approach. And so I believe that what's written in the first chapter of Genesis is true, that God literally, first he created light, and then he created the earth, and then on day 6 he created dinosaurs and cows and human beings. And
I would say that I do generally accept or operate from a theistic evolutionary perspective.
I accept the scientific discoveries, but I do affirm at the end of the day that it is God who created. It was the goodness of God that flowed out. The love of the Trinity wasn't contained to itself, but flowed out into the creating of the cosmos. And so I suspect that God is a creating God, and we are here because God wants us to be here. So I like to say, I don't think theology is at odds with science. I think theology must be influenced by science.
That's all, folks.
Thank you, team, for a great another presentation. I wonder if there are questions from our audience, and we'll certainly field those. But also, just to talk with the team to start us off, what was something that you took away from this project? What was something that you learned, or what was something that you came to understand in a new way? Anybody from this last team?
Yeah, I think the thing that struck me most was how historically involved the church was in like the formation of scientific theories, which we just, like the quote from Georges Lemay, who was a Belgian priest who basically architected the Big Bang Theory, which we usually consider in contrast to the Bible, but it was really a priest trying to show why his belief had scientific merit. So I think that's important to realize how involved Christians were in these scientific discoveries.
I think that might be news to a lot of people that wouldn't be aware of that, and just that knowledge is a helpful thing. Someone else from the team? Checking too to see if there's any questions. You guys have been really quiet out there today in this session for some questions from our audience. Any other comments from the panel, things that you took away or learned, or that you especially found interesting in your research?
Yeah, I think the perspective of nature or science and the Bible both being paths to truth, and us being able to follow both of them is something that this project opened my eyes to a little bit more. And just the fact that we don't have to reject either of them to accept the other.
Yeah, great. Yeah, there really is the possibility of two paths, and that there's a, which is it? And the answer is kind of yes, right? So that's helpful. Any other last minute thoughts from anyone on our contemporary question panels, or from Dr. McCoy, or from our esteemed audience out there in Zoom land?
I think Anna Raquel may be writing a question, but she's still having microphone problems, so keep an eye on the chat. But I will ask a question here. Certainly, I mean, there was a time, and I think, Jenna, when you and I did the interview, I think I talked a little bit about, like, there was a time in my growing up years where this was an omnipresent conversation, growing up in the church, and I was certainly warned many times, to regard scientific discovery with suspicion. My sense is that maybe that has been that has diminished somewhat, at least in the circles I travel in. But I don't know if that's a problem of the circles I travel in, or if that is representative. So I wanted to know a little bit about how you arrived at this topic. Was this a pressing issue in your own kind of growing up years and formation? And what were some examples of the kinds of conflict that you that maybe you witnessed?
Leandra? Looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, so for me, I grew up in a conservative Catholic home, and that definitely influenced this conversation a lot. But I always loved science growing up, and so I had these like two worlds that were kind of always clashing of like, I loved science and it made sense to me, and the truth and the evidence was, I'm a very logical thinker, so those are like where I tended to follow. But my family was very much like, no, the Bible is literal and this is what you have to believe. And so for much of my life, the two worlds did clash. But where I'm at now, I've been able to reconcile them, and I feel like it's a conversation that is worth having, because I'm sure there are still a lot of people who do experience that clash.
Leandra, just out of curiosity, in that context, was it the creation narrative that was the core issue, or were there other examples of places where religious thought and scientific thought seemed to be in conflict as you were growing up?
Yeah, it was definitely primarily the creation narrative, which is interesting because if you look at the first chapter of Genesis and the second chapter of Genesis, they lay out completely different creation narratives. But growing up, it was definitely pushed that God created a specific way and that there was no room for anything else in that. So evolution was something that I was taught to like disregard and things like that.
So Anna's question is here in the chat. As one of the individuals interviewed said, as humans, we can't know everything. Because this is a topic with a lot of controversy and one question can lead to multiple questions, when do we know we have researched and questioned enough? When do we know where to stop? And she says that was a great video. So yeah, so this is, again, the ongoing nature of science and discovery, and even the ongoing nature of our understanding of biblical scholarship. These things are ever changing, and we're finding new information, processing in new ways. What do you think about a topic like this? Do we ever figure it out, or does it kind of something that we continue to explore? What is the team's thoughts about that question from Anna?
I don't think we ever, it's like the horizon, like you can try and get closer to it, but the horizon will always be farther back than you can ever reach. And that's kind of the nature of science, is that there will always be more questions. And I think it is helpful to know that we won't necessarily have all the answers, but as humans, we still have to try, because I feel like that's in our nature. We want to understand as much as we can. I think it's very human to want to do that. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And as Professor Watkins points out in the chat, we're called to live in this unknowing, right? Do we really want a God that we can completely comprehend, or is God by God's nature beyond, at one level, beyond our comprehension, and yet at the same time, to be able to know God relationally, and to be able to investigate through scientific method and so forth the world around us. And so part of it is mystery, and we need to be comfortable living with the mystery. Well, thank you, team. All of you did a great job. Appreciate your sharing. Thanks everybody for watching and being part of this time. I'm going to turn things back over to Dr. McCoy for further instruction.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Nielsen, and thanks to all of you in Contemporary Questions for your good work here. Really enjoyed the videos and the thought-provoking nature of these topics, and your willingness to explore them, and also just particularly to say, acknowledging sort of some of your own uncertainties about these issues. I was quite affected to hear the ways in which these things sort of continue to play out in your own thought patterns. So I do just want to make mention that as we're sort of wrapping up this session, we will be moving into our next session, which you should be able to see on the screen there. We have 3 papers coming up, 2 from students, Ashley Prax, talking about child protection policies at church, Caitlin Knickerbocker, who's going to be talking about education in the Philippines, and then Professor David Young is going to be talking about the cost of biblical scholarship, or the actual production of Bibles, especially in the sort of early period in antiquity. And so that session will plan to start at 11:30. It is, as all of these are, a separate webinar, so we'll be ending this meeting, and you can grab the link here on that page in order to join the next session. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to all of you who have been in the audience, and hope to see you in some of our sessions later today.